Okay, everyone. I think Angie's caught up in business, so I will kick it off with introducing Jocelyn Armstrong to us. Jocelyn Armstrong Esquire is the Director of Inclusion and Outreach at the Ohio Bar Association. She leads programming and integration of inclusion, diversity, and outreach in association culture. Jocelyn is committed to advancing diversity and inclusion in the legal profession and the broader community. Jocelyn was admitted to the Ohio Bar in 2009. She's a native of Toledo, Ohio. She holds a bachelor's degree from the Max M. Fisher College of Business at The Ohio State University and a Juris Doctorate from Capital University Law School. At this time, I'd like to introduce Jocelyn and her discussion today on why words matter.
Thank you, Lori, and thanks everyone for being here. I see some familiar faces and names around the Zoom room. So we're going to have a good time together this afternoon. I will go ahead and get started by sharing my screen so that you can check out my slides along with me. I'm sure you would love to look at my wonderful jacket, but the slides will be way more fun, I promise. Uh-oh. Of course, I clicked the wrong one. Of course, we practiced and still, give me 1 second.
No worries. It's on the spot, right?
Absolutely. It always happens that way. That's kind of weird. Okay, that's not what's supposed to be happening. Hmm. Give me 1 second. I'm going to try this again.
Yeah, no problem.
Very bizarro land.
Great.
There we
Yep.
go. That's what I
There you go.
wanted you to see. All right. So we're going to talk about words matter and what do they mean. And the reason I want to have this conversation with you all is because one, you deemed that DEI or a JEDI, as we call it at the OSBA, is important for your organization. And with you being the first face often or the first voice that someone encounters when they enter your law practice, it is important that you have all the tools that you need to be able to communicate with your clients effectively. So we're going to spend a little time talking about some general JEDI terms. We're going to talk about gender identity, race and ethnicity, cognitive diversity, physical ability, and generational diversity. Now, these are things that probably are not unfamiliar to you. They are certainly things that you encounter every day in your life, but I just want to help you make sure that you all can level set around some terms. Now, I will tell you that I am a word nerd, so this stuff really excites me. As a matter of fact, there's actually a word for word nerds, and it's logophile. It's a Greek word for someone that loves words, right? See how much of a nerd I am? The other thing too, though, is as we talk through this time, and it will be a conversation, so please take yourself off mute or raise your Zoom hand as you see fit. I will tell you that as we're having this conversation, no sooner than we click off this Zoom call, if we were to go to another resource, there are probably new words added because language evolves constantly, right? So take this as a level set, take this as a ground floor introduction, and then continue to add as you go throughout your space and time. So I want to talk about a few rules of engagement as we get started in our conversation. The first being that we respect each other, right? I spelled it out that way on the slide because I happen to grow up in Toledo, which is very near to Detroit. So anytime that I can sneak in an Aretha Franklin reference, I will. So that's why I spelled out respect that way. I also encourage us to listen. Um, there are elders in our community who will tell us that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, right? We're supposed to listen twice as much as we talk. And listening means not only just hearing the words, but also processing what you're hearing, thinking about it, and resisting the urge to listen just to respond, right? Sometimes you have no response at all, and that's okay. The other thing is to be curious, both in this space and time that we have together, and even beyond this time, right? You all work in law practices and corporate offices, so your brains already are tuned into curiosity. You're always digging into something, trying to find a solution. The same can be applied as we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and learning terminology and words. And then I want you to get comfortable with discomfort. There will be nothing, I hope, that will have you run screaming from the Zoom room, but there will be maybe some unfamiliar terms or some concepts that are new and you're like, I don't know how I feel about that. That is fine. The goal here is to kind of manage through some of that as a collective and figure out how we'll move ahead, right? Okay, so with that, no further ado, let's get into some of this terminology. You will see on the top left of this slide that there are some ice cream cones. And I happen to be an ice cream fan. I happen to really love chocolate ice cream there in the middle. My mother is a strawberry ice cream fan, and I don't hold that against her. Why am I showing you ice cream cones? Because this is supposed to help us think about preference. And what we know about preferences, it is just that you prefer one thing over another. Simple as that. You have a preference for chocolate ice cream over strawberry ice cream. And people have preferences all the time. That's just kind of how we operate in space and in life. The next block shows us biases and different types of biases and how biases can impact the way we interact with people. And so a bias is an inclination or an outlook to judge someone or something without giving it full reason and thought, right? We think especially about implicit bias, which I'm sure we've all heard about in some space or time. And we know with implicit bias, our brains are moving so fast that we're unconsciously and automatically processing tens of thousands of bytes of information. I call it autopilot, right? It's just kind of where things are zinging past you as you go, and that's what's happening. And so I encourage you to resist away from the implicit bias and instead slow down. Because if we allow our implicit biases to go unchecked, then we start to find ourselves moving into things like explicit bias or confirmation bias, right? Confirmation bias is one of my favorites because it's something that impacts me, I know, and many others that I know. Confirmation bias is our tendency to listen to or engage with information that confirms our existing beliefs, right? There's certain Instagram accounts I follow and certain things that I read on a regular basis, and it aligns perfectly with what I believe about the world. But I challenge myself to try to go outside of my usual spaces and pick up information in other places and kind of process what I'm seeing in those spaces. And if it doesn't automatically align with what I always think, then I try to figure out why. And maybe I can shift my thinking that way. The other thing is prejudice. And so what we know prejudice to be, official definition from the dictionary, because that is how I am. It is a preconceived opinion that is not based on reason or actual experience. So prejudice sets up in our minds and finds itself into our interactions with people. And it's often based on things that we don't actually know about. Like, I don't know where everyone, I know you're all from Central Ohio, but I don't know if everyone like grew up in Columbus or nearby, right? And so maybe if you're from Cleveland or if you're from a city in Southern Ohio, people have very interesting ideas about who they think you are and how they think you are based upon where you tell them that you're from, right? And that's not accurate, especially if they've never been to your city. And then the other thing I want to talk about is privilege. Privilege is an interesting word because that's one that sometimes gets us a little hot under the collar, makes our stomachs feel kind of funny. And I want us to think about how we engage with privilege and what that really means. So what we know about privilege is that it is just a thing. In its very clear sense, it's not good or bad. But what it is, it's a special right or advantage that we gain based upon who we are, right? So I tell people often that I am clear that I have education privilege, right? I went to undergrad, I went to law school. Many of you went to undergrad and then you went to a paralegal program. So most of us on this call have at least one degree. That's a form of educational privilege because that's not something that everybody has or has access to, right? I do not have height privilege. You cannot tell because we're on Zoom, but I'm only 5'3". And that kind of bothers me some days because if I had height privilege, I could reach the stuff on the top shelf in Target. That's just a me issue, right? But when we think about privilege, though, again, how you use your privilege is important, right? Because sometimes people will be like, you're so privileged. And it's like, but is that bad? Right? Not necessarily. But if your privilege is being used to block access to other people, or you're not helping, like young paralegals learn, or those kinds of things, that's when you're using your privilege as what I call a weapon. But I like to use my privilege as a tool, right? So helping other people gain access, helping people understand concepts that they don't have familiarity with because they're not lawyers, right? That's where privilege can be used as a tool. And that's when I like it, right? So think about that the next time somebody calls out the term privilege. Think about where it's coming from. Is it true? Probably. And then look at how that privilege is being used. Want to talk now about gender and gender identity. I know that this is probably something that you all are experiencing quite a bit because even with online filings, there is still volumes and volumes of paperwork forms that you all have to fill out. And so you have probably seen the shift depending on where you are in your career and depending on the practice area where some forms only said like he or him. And then they evolved and they added he or she or him or her, right? Sometimes the she was like a parenthetical, like an oh, by the way. I've seen in some courts where they have adjusted the language and they say defendant, plaintiff, they, all the forms are pre-filled and there is no gender marking at all. They're gender neutral. Some other spaces have started adding they, them pronouns. And these are all ways that we identify people. I tend to lean toward gender neutral. It helps me often because a lot of times I'm in a room with different types of people. And my favorite term, even though I'm not from the South, I love saying y'all, right? And that means that I'm addressing everyone in the room. It feels kind of warm and friendly, right? Because it's a kind of Southern thing. And then that way I'm not saying, like ladies and gentlemen, and then there might be a non-binary person, right? I don't say like, hey kids, if I'm at a law school, because even though they're all markedly younger than me, they're not children, right? So I just say y'all, everyone, how's the folks doing, those kinds of things to keep it neutral. What you will find though as you're interacting with clients, and you may have already experienced this, is that sometimes your clients are transitioning. And so when you first met this client 2 years ago, when the civil case started, you were calling them Susan, and Susan was referred to as she, her. And the next time you see them, it's been a couple of years, the case is taking a while. You are now not talking to Susan, but you're talking to Stephen. And so you're thinking through that and how do you address this person? Well, you start to use new pronouns and you use the name Stephen instead of Susan, right? There's a shift and an adjustment. You also have to help the attorneys that you work for in the courts understand that when someone is transitioning, it's going to impact, of course, how the paperwork is happening, right? And then you have to help the client understand, hey, if we file this case, all the court documents have the name Susan. So we'll have to start using Stephen going forward, but we also have to notify the court and help them understand, particularly if this person is in the process of getting their name legally changed. So help your client prepare by saying, if we're in court and they refer to you by Susan, it's because they're, reading the old documents and we have to help them get caught up, right? Some judges and magistrates I've encountered will say that very plainly, particularly when they have to put it on the record to note that the name of the person has changed, but the party itself hasn't changed, right? So these are some of the ways that your clients will present to you and how you can help figure out the landscape and help them walk through it. The other thing is, it may come up depending in your practice area. You may have to talk about LGBTQIA. So those are members of our community who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer. You will sometimes see it written out as LGBTQ plus. I always take the habit of whatever room I'm in is how I explain the acronym. Because I was in a meeting recently with some colleagues and we were talking about, well, what do the letters of this acronym mean? And we were all pretty clear on like the first 5 letters. And then we got to the I and the A and people had different answers, depending on where they had gone to school or how they were socialized, the community groups that they're in. So I always encourage folks to listen to the room that you're in, because in some spaces the A means ally, in some spaces the A means asexual, right? So follow the culture of the room that you're in, and they will help you be clear about what the A and the I mean. Another thing that I will encourage you to pay attention to is dead naming. Remember, I talked about you may have a client who is going through transition and they're changing their name. And sometimes people refer to folks by their previous name, not because it's a thing that they've forgotten or not because they have to update the court record, but sometimes they just refuse to address the person by their new name. And that is dead name. because you are not addressing this person about who they are as they're standing before you. One thing though is that people are like, I don't want to do that. Help me find a way to, practice and make sure I don't dead name, that I use the proper name for someone. And so my tip or my hack, if you will, that I use for myself is I think about the fact that I have cousins who get married. And also when they get married, they take on the name of their spouse's last name. So I have a cousin named Veronica. And growing up, Veronica's last name was Branch because that was her name from her mom and dad. When she got married, her last name became Jeffries. I've been calling her Veronica Branch for the first 15 years of my life. And then I had to remember, oh, wait, she's married to this person and she has a new last name. And that's a similar thing that I do. If I know someone who was transitioning, I remember what their old name was, but now I'm practicing using it. All right, race and ethnicity. This comes up, I know, a lot in practice because again, filling out forms, helping people prepare for deposition, for trial. I've been asked before, well, should I call you Black or African American? And my response is usually, well, what is the context? Is there a particular form that we're filling out? Are we describing, something specific? Because if it doesn't matter for the space or room that we're in, you don't really have to figure out which one at all, right? However, in the practice of law, we know that, for instance, if we have a client and we're helping them prepare for testimony at trial, and they're describing a car accident, and they were a witness to a car accident, and they would say, well, I saw the white man with red hair driving the blue BMW. Makes perfect sense in that instance to use it because it is a descriptor because you're trying to help set a scene, right? Or if you work in the criminal space, we know when they are either checking people into jail, they mark their race, their height, their weight, their age, or if there's someone that they're looking for and it happens to be your client, right? That'll be a part of the description as well, along with things like tattoos and hair color and all of that. So if it is important to the conversation, if it's important to the thing that you're discussing or the thing that you're working on, then you should use it. Now, I will say what's interesting is that sometimes we see a person and we think we understand who they are based upon what we see. And then sometimes we're not right. So it's best to listen to how the person describes themselves. And one thing you can also do is you can say, something, you can ask a question, if you're filling out a form, which one of these apply to you? That sort of thing. How should we refer to you if we are describing you for this purpose? Similarly, you can do that as well when we're talking about gender and gender identity. I will ask people, when we're talking about gender identity, how would you like to be introduced? Because then they will say to me their pronouns or what have you. So then going back to race and ethnicity, I was in the Dominican Republic one time for work. And I got off the plane. It was truly a work trip, I promise. I got off the plane, it was warm, it was sunny, it was beautiful. It was April. And I walked into the airport terminal and a lot of people at the airport looked like me. And I was a little startled because I'd never been there before. And these people saw me and they started speaking to me in very rapid Spanish. And I was trying to reflect my high school years and I was kind of thrown off kilter, right? Because they looked at me and they thought I was Dominican. And I was like, oh, and I was able to tell them that I was American, but I only spoke a tiny bit of Spanish. And then they looked at my passport and they were like, right? Because some of them had not been to the US and seen a Black American woman who looked like me. So again, that's a thing that happens sometimes. We automatically have an idea in our brains about who someone is by what we see on the surface. But thinking about that, everything that we see up front is not the entire story, right? And we have the opportunity to learn more about folks as we spend more time with them. Another thing that I want to make sure that we talk about, and making sure we use specific terminology in our daily work is neurodiversity. This is sometimes a part of diversity, equity, and inclusion that is overlooked, because it's not usually something that we can see, right? We can generally see someone's skin color, or we can see what we perceive someone's gender to be, right? But autism is not something that we can always see, or ADHD is not something we're going to see. If one of our clients or our colleagues has a mental illness, We don't know because there's nothing that says that from a visual standpoint, right? But it is still important to how we do our work. Because one thing that we have to remember is that all brains work in unique ways. Some folks have educational and medical diagnoses that um, document that the specific ways in which their brains work different. And so the ways that we can help folks through this is one by using the proper terminology, right? So I've only put positive terms on this slide. And as you see in the picture there as well, there are terms, but they're all positive terms. And so that's one of the first things we can do is use the technical speech, use the positive terms. The other thing we can also remember is that I like to, and it's something that I was taught, is using person first language. So instead of saying that someone's autistic, we would say it's a person with autism, right? Or a person with ADHD, because we always want to focus on the humanity of that person first. The thing that's important with this as well, though, just as an aside, is that the more we kind of have a general understanding of things like autism and ADHD, it helps us when we're dealing with clients and colleagues. Because those of us in the legal profession know, we've sat in offices, we've sat in conference rooms and courtrooms, that sometimes people not giving you direct eye contact is seen as being shady or shifty or that they're not paying attention. When in actuality, they might have autism. So direct eye contact is not a thing that they do regularly. And it doesn't mean that they're trying to ignore you or that they're not paying attention. It's just a way that they are processing the other things in the room instead of what's around them, right? So that's something you can help the attorneys that you work for, your fellow office staff, understand, as well as preparing when folks are going to court. Helping your attorney prepare the client for court and helping the court prepare for the client. To know that there may be some accommodations that will be needed, or there are some things that may seem unfamiliar in the courtroom process, um, that you can help them be aware of, right? And I always encourage folks to, if you have a client on the autism spectrum who has ADHD or some other mental illness or mental disorder, they probably have a medical care team. They also have ideas about how they would like to be addressed and how they would like their accommodations to work. So make sure you include your client when it's time to talk to the board or anyone else in your office staff about the meetings or the process or anything as you go through that space. Um, that takes us right and bridges us into disability. Also a space where I like to make sure that one, we are very clear about the terminology that we're using. Following the people who we are talking to and talking about. The person with the disability is the person that I allow to lead me in the language that I should use. For a while, I was using the term differently, and I, by third hand, was talking to a friend, and she was conducting a training similar to this one, and she said differently able, and a couple of people in the room were like, no, because they were disabled individuals. And they said, please don't use that, just say disabled. Because when you say differently abled, well, of course, everybody has different physical abilities. So you're not, acknowledging the fact that we have a disability. Now, that doesn't mean that that's the only thing you focus on about that person, right? And that you put them in just this one box because of the disability. But like, don't gloss over it and try to make it like sound nice. Just say, this is a person who has vision loss, or this is a person who is blind, or this person has hearing loss. It's totally fine to acknowledge what the thing is, and then figure out how we're going to navigate with that client. The other thing I will say is being aware of when we're using terms. Sometimes there are common colloquialisms that we use that are not respectful of different communities. Saying things like curriculum, um, saying things like short-sighted, those kinds of things are not always well received, right? And that takes more practice because those are words and phrases that we use a lot. But it's possible for us to shift and change. The other thing that I think that we have to be aware of, and as much as the language that we're using, is the way that we are creating spaces. So if we're having a meeting somewhere, thinking about our colleagues that are coming to the meeting and if there needs to be accessible doorways and things. So folks that have walkers and wheelchairs, can they get in? right? Is there an elevator in the space if there's multiple floors for them to be able to join us at the meeting, for instance? Um, or even with our clients, how are they getting into the courthouse? Have we prepare folks ahead of time to make sure that the chairs move from the table so that the wheelchair can be at the council table and all those kinds of things. And then another thing is that this is something that I suggest to folks is we have a tendency to want to help people because we are in a healthy profession and it's just a good thing to do. But I like to ask, as I would with anyone else, how can I help you? Because we sometimes have the tendency to think that we know better because we move about able bodied, a lot of us. And so we'll be quick to reach in front of a person to grab a door or something like that. And I encourage you to ask first. My mother was born with glaucoma and has several friends who have different types of vision loss. And so when I'm out with them, some of them have canes, some of them have dogs, some of them are young, some of them are older. And so I'll say, do you want my help? And they'll tell me how, and sometimes it's going to get them, a beverage, or helping them figure out where the plates are sitting on the table if we're out to lunch, or helping them back to the front of the restaurant, because their ride's picking them up. So I'll ask how they want their help. They'll tell me where I should stand, if they need my help walking around or something like that. If they want to hold my arm or my shoulder, these are all things, because if I just immediately decide that I'm gonna like move things around for them or help them walk around, I might end up either putting a plate in the wrong space or, we might end up getting hurt. So always ask where you can be helpful in the first place. Last space where we're going to talk about diversity and terminology is generational diversity. This is something that impacts us all at work every day. There are 5 generations of people in the workplace. Not as many traditionalists in the silent generation, but still a few, particularly in the legal space. I think the legal profession, academia, and religious spaces are where folks tend to work the longest and well into their advanced years. Lots of baby boomers, lots of Gen X, those are my people, millennials, and then Gen Z are our newest coworkers. These are the folks that are fresh out of college and they are joining us in the workforce. And so when we think about this, one, we know that there are a lot of stereotypes that we throw around about the different generations and how they show up in workplaces. The other thing is that just because someone was born at a specific time doesn't mean they're going to interact or act in a certain way. We like to say, oh, those boomers, they don't know how to use technology. Well, I have an 82-year-old uncle who texts me regularly, screenshots and memes and pictures of his garden. So I am very clear that, that everyone who's a traditionalist or a boomer does not have challenges with technology, right? And then similarly, we say, oh, Gen Z folks don't really like to work. Well, they do like to work. They just like to work differently than the generations ahead of them. They might be up at 2 o'clock in the morning doing their best work for like 6 hours. And it seems very strange to the rest of us who are used to 9 to 5 only, right? So I want us to know, instead of thinking about some of the stereotypes and things that come with the generations, instead think about the ways that having all these generations of workplace can help us. There are some things that I know that have changed in the law and changed in the way that law is practiced in the time since I graduated from law school. And so I get excited when there's a new lawyer that wants to even talk to me because that means that I get to be up on the current thing, right? Similarly, because I'm kind of in the middle, when there are older attorneys who have, wisdom on a certain approach and things of that nature. I like learning from them too, right? And the same can be said with paralegals and our other colleagues in the office. Because of when we came about, because of when we learned how to work, we all have something different that we can contribute to make our workplaces run smoothly, be successful, and we can learn from each other. All right, let's take a pause here. We're gonna breathe. Everybody feeling okay? Nod, thumbs up. You can't throw tomatoes at me because we're on Zoom, so that's awesome. But wanting to shift gears a little bit, right? We talked about making sure we're using proper terminology, that we're carefully using terminology, and that in addition to the words that we use, we're interacting with humanity in a certain way, right? So thinking about what this means for us in the legal profession. Well, the first thing is the impact that we have on the people that we encounter, right? We are a public facing profession for the most part, right? There are some of us who do a lot of research and hang in the background. But mostly, particularly paralegals, public facing, first face somebody sees, first person somebody meets, first person they talk to on the telephone, right? And so why is this important? Because when we're thinking about terminology and the way that we're being inclusive with the people that we're dealing with, because we never know who's walking in the door or who's on the other side of that telephone call, the more prepared we are to work with clients of various identities, the better equipped they feel like we are to handle their matter, right? They don't feel like they're coming into one already a strange place because I've got to go to court or I've got to deal with this, you know, credit settlement or whatever. They're already, kind of unsure of where they're walking into because they're not lawyers a lot of times, right? So if they feel like, oh, these people have taken some time to learn about someone like me, to try to understand me, it helps the client relationship. And so sometimes that means we have to understand their culture and their background. And that helps us, again, better serve the client. So there are sometimes language things that impact how we interact with clients. So we have to call interpreters and get some help that way. Sometimes we have a client who is maybe blind, so we have to make sure there's braille or some other thing to help us communicate with them. Helping, clients get into spaces, they're veterans or they're disabled or whatever the case may be. Knowing a little bit about them and then how we can help them is so much, has so much impact, I should say, on the client relationship with the firm, with the staff, with the lawyers. The other thing is that we can help offer better solutions the more we learn about other people. So if we have one experience with a client that maybe has some sort of hearing impairment, they have hearing aids, or they're completely deaf, right? We continue to build that, and the next time we see that, we're like, oh, I've had a client like this before. Let me ask this new client, do we need to get you an interpreter? Or is there some other device that you use, right? It helps better prepare us for future interactions. The other thing, and this will be no surprise to you, is that the more we learn about people and the ways that we try to, and come back to that one, the ways that we try to make sure we're serving our clients best has an impact on the way that the community sees us, right? Because how many of you, because you work in the legal profession, have been places and you've heard the lawyer jokes? I've even laughed at some of them and I employ it, right? When you hear the lawyer jokes, where you hear things about lawyers and people either don't understand what happened in the legal profession, they don't understand what you do as a paralegal, right? They're like, oh, you're a secretary. No, you're not. You have a certification and you've gone to school to do some other things. You don't just answer the telephone. Not that that's bad. Somebody else needs to answer the telephone. But right, they don't understand all the time too. So when we start to make sure that we're learning about others, it gives us an opportunity to spend time with them and teach us more about what happens in the legal profession. And then it builds a more positive perception of the legal profession in the community, right? They realize the reason why, the rates that we charge are what they are. Or they realize why we try to hold them to deadlines because we are accountable to deadlines, right? And they start to remember that we are their neighbors and and we live in the same community as them. And so the more we interact with the public and we try to learn about them, it gives us another opportunity to learn and interact with them. And it has personal implications too. So we talked about, for instance, generational diversity. And I know that some of the folks on this call probably have children, grandchildren, younger nieces and nephews, favorite kids, for instance. And when I say kids, I'm talking about the ones from babies all the way up to 25, right? And so the more we learn about different generations, for instance, that helps in our personal interactions with our young relatives and friends, right? We can approach them with a different mindset of not just saying, oh my gosh, kids these days, and trust me, that is one of my favorite temptations. Kids these days, but instead to remember that, like, yeah, right, I was a kid these days at one point in my life too. And what did that seem like for me? So maybe I should listen to these new folks and pick up some new things, right? So that's kind of what getting into some of this inclusion, how that impacts us on even just a regular day at the dinner table. All right. So as we're kind of rounding the corner here, thinking about from the standpoint of what are we supposed to do next? We've learned all these terms and we've talked about the way it can help us be better paralegals, better lawyers. How do we move forward with this? Well, the first thing I'll say is know your audience. So when you're thinking about what words am I using, what terms am I using, listen to how people describe themselves. Um, Ask them how would they like to be introduced. Those are ways and clues that you can get on figuring out who you're talking to. If they need some help hearing, or if there's difference in language, right? You'll know that pretty clearly, and so you'll understand how to communicate and interact with them. The other thing is establishing a common vernacular. So as you're sitting around in your PACO meetings, right? Um, Practicing using some of these terms, maybe practicing using gender neutral. I know a lot of times in paralegal spaces, many of the members who interact in the professional associations are women, but I also know that there are men who are paralegals, right? So maybe instead of coming into the room and starting the lunch and being like, all right, hey ladies, we'll wait. Hey y'all, hey everyone, right? Those are things that we can try and practicing these terms and this common vernacular together. I also will say, we talked about at least one acronym, we talked about LGBTQ plus. We know that our profession is full of all the acronyms you can find. The challenge with that though is that sometimes when we're talking to people from other professions, they use similar letters, but the words mean all different things. So I say to either explain the acronym. So at least the very first time you say it to someone, say the whole thing. And then you can switch to just the acronym or just don't use acronyms at all. And my other encouragement is to keep learning new words. So we had like a primer today. This was a very basis, first level kind of conversation. But then there's so many more terms, right? We talked about pronouns like he, she. There's also things like neopronouns like Zer, right? So spend some time kind of picking around. There's organizations like the Human Resource Human Rights Campaign, Raleigh, Ohio. There's style guides that I like to use from spaces that deal with the Americans with Disabilities Act or other disability rights groups. They put out style guides that they share with journalists so that they can use proper terminology. Those are all ways that we can kind of also keep up to date with those things as well. And continue just to learn because, I'm a word nerd, so I like to make more word nerds as much as possible. And the last thing I'll leave you with too, though, is when you're trying to make sure you're using the right terms, right? When you're trying to learn new words, you will encounter times where sometimes you flub, you mess it up, right? You might call someone ma'am when you should be calling them sir or what have you. It's okay, right? None of us is perfect. None of us run everything 100% of the time. And so when you make a mistake, it's okay. Breathe it out. Apologize if you have to, and then just practice for the next time. Because people will see your true intention and they'll know that you're trying. And so they will appreciate that and they will work with you through it, right? So it's okay, mistakes happen. Like the same way that if someone makes a mistake and they call you the wrong pronoun, or they misidentify you in some other way, give them that same grace to go like, yeah, I know that wasn't the purpose. So we'll fix it. And if you would like to find me later, there's a couple of ways you can email me. Of course, I answer emails, I really do. I also have a QR code there on the screen from my LinkedIn. I started hanging out with younger people, so this is my new fancy thing. It's where I've learned that everybody loves the QR codes, and so I started adding them to my presentation. So with that, I'm going to end my slideshow. Thanking you all for your time. I'm going to stop my screen share. And I'm gonna ask if there's any questions, any comments, any like high fives, any tomatoes. Oh, hi, Garth. Oh, Laura gave me a high five. Thank you. I'm sorry, I haven't seen Garth in a long time. I got way too excited. Linda, is that a high five or a hand up?
It's both.
Oh, wait.
From-
I will accept the high five and then I will take the comment or a question that comes with the hand up.
Very wonderful presentation. It's great to remind us to do these things. Your style guides that you mentioned, can you please give us links to those so we've got them?
I
I'd
will.
love to keep up to date on that.
I will send the links. Of course, I have them saved in a different document, but I will make a note and I will send those to Lori to circulate to the group.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And I can send Lori, PDF of the slides as well. I can do that.
Thanks so much, Jocelyn.
Awesome. Thank you all. I appreciate, I know lunchtime is a wild time sometimes. So I appreciate you all spending some of your lunchtime with me.
I wanted to say thank you for the different perspective on the word privilege. I know I would look privileged, but I think that a lot of people would look at Americans, and to be born in the US is a privilege too. So it's all how you look at it. So thanks again for that. And how do you use it? I like that a lot.
Yeah, how do you use it is my thing, because
Mhm.
you know, there's a way that we can like make things nice for lots of people if we just, use a little bit of our privilege for as a tool.
Sure, kind of even it all out.
Yeah, right.
Linda, did you have another question, or just that lingering high five?
Just the lingering high
This is
five.
awesome.
I'll take it.
This is awesome. Thanks. Angie's on, so pass it over to her if you have any questions.
Thank you, Lori, for getting things kicked off for me. I have an office crisis going on today, so I wasn't able to hop on quite on time. I do want to thank you, Jocelyn, for joining us today. We always enjoy hearing from you. You always give us such good information, such good, impactful information. We appreciate that. Let's see. I do want to make a couple of quick announcements since we have a few minutes. Don't forget that PACO is part of a statewide food drive this year. It's our second year. And this year, I'm so excited. The paralegal associations in Cincinnati, Cleveland, Northwest Ohio, and Columbus, all four are having a concurrent food drive during the entire month of February. Each region is going to be donating the non-perishable and financial donations that they receive to their own local agencies. Here in Columbus, everything will go to the Mid-Ohio Food Bank. We will kick off on February 1st, and we'll wrap up on February 29th. In the meantime, on the website, you will be able to find in February a QR code, since we all love them so much, don't we, Jocelyn? You will find a QR code that will take you directly to the Mid-Ohio Food Bank site if you would like to make, or your firm would like to make, a financial donation on our behalf. And then Mid-Ohio will take care of the tax receipt and everything for you from there. There will be a lot of different ways to participate this year. First of all, during our happy hour scheduled for Thursday, February 8th, that's at Getaway Brewing up in Dublin, from 6 to 8 in the evening. Come on up, join us for some refreshments and a couple of drinks and some good time with our colleagues, a good time to socialize and get to know one another a little bit better, renew some friendships, and things of that nature. We will be having collection boxes at that time, so you're welcome and encouraged to bring non-perishable food items during that happy hour. Now, as an incentive, the first 10 paralegals that show up to the happy hour at Getaway Brewing with 10 or more non-perishable items will receive one free beverage that evening. So keep that in mind. We definitely want to see everybody there. But also we have several firms and sustaining members that will have boxes set up in their office. Spectrum Reporting, Veritext, the Columbus Bar Association. Let's see, I'm doing this from memory. My office at Eastman and Smith, Freeman, Mathis and Gary, Almer Byrne, Porter Wright, Morrison Arthur. Oh my gosh, I can't think of the name of Samantha's firm, Monast Law Firm in Upper Arlington. And I think I may have forgotten, I think I may have skipped one. Those will all be collection sites. There will be collection boxes. You can drop off your non-perishable items there. If you would like to become more involved, and I encourage you to do this, talk to your managing partner, talk to your attorney, and see if, hey, can we put a box in our office? Either for the public to bring in, or if they don't want to open the doors to the public, just for your office staff, just for your firm to participate. That would be a big help. Naturally, any little bit will help. And we would encourage you to get involved and to help out as you're able to. If you're interested in having a box in your office, let us know at info@pacoparalegals.org. I think is the email, and you can let us know and reach out. We'll be happy to provide a box to your office. Then at the end of the month, we'll have all those boxes brought to one central location, which actually will be my office. And then Mid-Ohio Food Bank will come and collect everything all at once. So that is a very exciting thing that's going on this year. Last year, it was only Columbus and Northwest Ohio Paralegal Association that participated. This year, we've got Cleveland and Cincinnati in the mix, and I'm really excited. We're going to have a very successful food drive, I'm sure. Also, keep an eye out on the website. Also coming in February will be information on scholarships, PACO scholarships that will be awarded during Paralegal Day on May the 20th. We have one $500 scholarship that goes toward any student paralegal program that is at Columbus State or affiliated with Columbus State. We also have, don't forget, a $250 scholarship that is available to anybody who is registered to sit for the OSBA Certified Paralegal examination. That exam is on May the 18th. It's a great way to bump your career up to the next level. Perhaps give yourself the credentials you might need to get to that next job that you've always dreamed of. We would encourage you all to consider sitting for the exam. We do have a study program, a study group led by Randy Daniels Blair. And I want to mention that last year, everybody in her study group passed the exam. So it's a phenomenal opportunity to study with colleagues that are also getting ready to sit for the exam. And so that is a good option, a good opportunity as well. If you're interested in sitting for the exam, you can find all the information you need on the OSBA website, and registration is open for that now through, I believe, May 31st. So definitely want to encourage everyone to give that a look. I think that's everything I have for right now. Does anybody else have any questions, comments, announcements to share? Don't forget, tomorrow, Friday at noon, the OSBA Paralegal Committee is meeting. You do not have to be an OSBA member to attend. And we would encourage you to hop on the OSBA's website and get some information on that for registering and join us at noon. And it's always a good time. Let's see. I'm looking at the comments, no questions, but a lot of accolades. It was a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much again, Jocelyn, for sharing your time and your expertise. And thank you everyone for taking the time today to join us. If nobody has anything else, we will go ahead and conclude and give you back the last 9 minutes of your lunch hour. Oh, you're very welcome, Jocelyn. Anytime we can share information on what's going on in other groups, we like to do that. Okay, have a great day, everyone.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks for this professional development session.
Lori, you're going to send out the certificates and the slideshow when you get them?
Yes, ma'am. I have a question.
Perfect.
Who is at Masa, ATAMASA?
Angela
Does any-
Adamus.
Angela Adamus. Okay. All right. I go to the all the emails on the OSB PACO site.
Right,
That's how I
right,
found these people. Okay.
right.
Angela Mattis. Okay.
Okay, great.
Got it. All right. Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.